Subscribe now. New Royal Guard stories. Exposing shocking moments inside the royal family, the night was unusually quiet at Clarence House. Guard. Harrison stood at his post near the eastern wing, his breath forming small clouds in the cold March air. He had been working the night shift for 3 years now, and he knew every sound, every shadow, every normal occurrence in this historic building. But tonight, something felt different. At exactly 3 in the morning, Harrison heard a sound that made him freeze. It was the distinct click of a door latch, but it came from a part of the building where no doors should be opening at this hour. The sound echoed through the empty corridor, sharp and clear in the silence. Harrison immediately reached for his radio, his training kicking in automatically. The Queen Consort was supposed to be in her private quarters on the 2nd floor. All senior royals had strict security protocols, especially during the night hours. Any movement outside designated areas triggered immediate response procedures. Harrison moved quietly toward the source of the sound, his footsteps barely audible on the polished marble floor. As he rounded the corner near the library, Harrison saw something that would change everything. A section of the wooden paneling, which he had walked past thousands of times, stood slightly ajar. Behind it was darkness, a space he never knew existed. The panel looked like it had been part of the wall for centuries, perfectly matching the surrounding woodwork. But now, it revealed a narrow passageway, barely wide enough for one person. Harrison's heart raced. In all his years of service, he had never seen this door open. He had never even known it was a door. The palace had many secrets, many hidden passages from centuries past. But this one was not on any security map he had ever studied. He spoke quietly into his radio, alerting the control room about the situation. Within seconds, 2 more guards arrived. Senior Guard Matthews, who had served the royal family for over 20 years, looked at the open panel with wide eyes. He recognized it immediately from old palace blueprints he had studied during his early training. This was one of the forgotten passages, built during the reign of Queen Victoria, designed to allow discreet movement through the residence. But it had been sealed decades ago, or so everyone believed. The guards heard footsteps from inside the passage. Someone was walking through the hidden corridor, moving away from them. Matthews made a quick decision. He signaled Harrison to follow the exterior route, while he and the 3rd guard would enter the passage. They needed to identify who was using this forbidden route and why. Harrison ran through the main corridors, his mind racing with possibilities. Could it be an intruder who had discovered this secret entrance? But that seemed unlikely. The passage opened from the inside, and palace security was too tight for anyone to breach undetected. As he reached the garden entrance, Harrison saw the passage's exit point, another hidden door built into the stone wall near the rose garden. The door began to open from the inside. Harrison positioned himself carefully, ready for anything. What happened next would become one of the most closely guarded secrets in royal history. A figure emerged from the darkness, wrapped in a long dark coat with the collar turned up high. The person moved quickly but carefully, clearly familiar with the route. As the figure stepped into the dim light from the garden lamps, Harrison recognized her immediately. It was Camilla, the Queen Consort, dressed in civilian clothes, without any of her usual royal detail or protection officers. Harrison stepped forward, making his presence known. The Queen Consort stopped abruptly, her expression shifting from surprise to something else, something harder to read. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The garden was completely silent, except for the distant sound of London traffic beyond the palace walls. Camilla composed herself quickly, her royal training evident even in this unexpected situation. She looked directly at Harrison, her eyes sharp and assessing. Harrison stood at attention, uncertain of the proper protocol for this unprecedented situation. He had caught a senior member of the royal family using a secret passage in the middle of the night, leaving the secured palace grounds without her protection detail. Matthews emerged from the passage behind Camilla, slightly out of breath. The senior guard's face was professionally neutral, but his eyes showed his concern. This was a major security breach, regardless of who was involved. The safety protocols existed for good reasons, and they applied to everyone, including the royals themselves. Camilla spoke first, her voice calm but firm. She explained that she needed some air, some space to think. But her explanation raised more questions than it answered. Why use a forgotten passage instead of simply asking her security team? Why leave in secret at 3 in the morning? Where was she planning to go? Matthews requested that she return to her quarters immediately. The Queen Consort hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, Harrison saw something unexpected. She looked tired, not just physically but emotionally drained. This was not the composed royal figure the public knew. This was someone carrying a heavy burden, someone who felt trapped enough to risk using a dangerous, unmapped passage in the middle of the night. Back in the security office, phones were already ringing. The incident had been logged automatically when Harrison first reported the open panel. Protocol required immediate notification to senior palace officials. Within minutes, private secretaries were being woken, security chiefs were being briefed, and a crisis management team was assembling. Harrison returned to his post, but his mind kept replaying those moments in the garden. He had been trained to protect the royals, to maintain their security at all costs. But he had never been trained for a situation where a royal was trying to escape that very protection. The implications were enormous and troubling. In her private quarters, Camilla sat by the window, looking out at the garden she had just tried to leave. Her lady-in-waiting had been summoned, along with her senior protection officer. Explanations would be demanded. Questions would be asked. But some answers she was not ready to give. The hidden passage had been discovered years ago, quite by accident, during one of her sleepless nights. She had been exploring the older sections of Clarence House, running her hands along the walls when she found the loose panel. Behind it lay history, a secret corridor that connected to the gardens. A route used by royals long dead, who also needed escape routes for their own reasons. She had never intended to actually use it. It was simply comforting to know it existed, to know there was a way out if she ever truly needed one. But tonight, the walls had felt too close, the expectations too heavy, and the isolation too complete. She had made a mistake. She knew that now. But the mistake revealed a deeper truth about her situation, one that could not be easily addressed or quickly forgotten. The security team worked through the rest of the night, securing the passage, updating their maps, and revising their protocols. Harrison wrote his report with careful precision, knowing it would be read by people far above his rank. He included every detail but tried to remain objective, focusing on facts rather than interpretations. As dawn broke over London, the incident was already being contained. The number of people who knew about it was limited to essential personnel only. The passage would be permanently sealed within days. New security measures would be implemented. On the surface, everything would return to normal. But Harrison knew something had changed. He had seen behind the curtain, glimpsed the human reality behind the royal image. The Queen Consort was not just a title or a position. She was a person who felt trapped enough to risk everything for a few moments of freedom. That knowledge would stay with him long after this night was forgotten. By everyone else, the morning briefing took place. In a secure conference room deep within Clarence, House Harrison had been summoned along with Matthews and 3 other guards who had responded to the incident. The room was windowless, soundproof, and equipped with security measures that prevented any electronic recording. This conversation would leave no digital trace. Sir Robert Thornbury, the head of royal protection, sat at the head of the table. His face showed no emotion, but his fingers drummed slowly on the polished wood surface. Next to him sat Lady Patricia Hendricks, Camilla's principal private secretary, and Colonel James Whitmore from the Household Division. These were people who managed crises for the royal family, who made problems disappear before the public even knew they existed. Sir Robert spoke first. His voice measured and controlled. He wanted to hear exactly what happened, every detail from each guard's perspective. Harrison repeated his account, keeping his tone professional and his language precise. Matthews added his observations, noting the Queen Consort's demeanor and her attempted explanation. The other guards confirmed the timeline and the response procedures they had followed. Lady Patricia listened carefully, occasionally making notes on a leather-bound pad. When the guards finished their reports, she asked questions that revealed her real concerns. Had anyone else seen the Queen Consort leave? Were there any cameras that might have captured her movements? Had any staff members been awake who might have noticed something unusual? The answers provided some relief. The passage had no camera coverage because no one knew it existed as an active route. The night staff had been in different sections of the building. The external cameras had been positioned to watch for intruders coming in, not residents going out. The Queen Consort's movements had gone undetected by everyone except the guards who responded to Harrison's alert. But Sir Robert identified the real problem immediately. The Queen Consort had knowledge of this passage, which meant she had been planning, or at least contemplating, this kind of departure. This was not a spontaneous decision made at 3 in the morning. She had discovered the route, tested it perhaps, and kept it secret as her personal escape option. That level of premeditation raised serious questions about her state of mind and her relationship with the institution she represented. Colonel Whitmore raised another concern. If the Queen Consort felt so confined that she needed to find secret exits, what did that say about the support systems around her? The royal family had counselors, advisors, and confidants. They had protocols for managing stress and pressure. Why had these systems failed to address whatever was driving her to such desperate measures? The meeting continued for another hour, dissecting every aspect of the incident. Security protocols would be reviewed and strengthened. The hidden passage would be sealed with concrete and steel, eliminating it as an option forever. Additional monitoring systems would be installed in areas previously considered low risk. But these were just technical solutions to a human problem. Harrison was dismissed, along with the other guards. As he left the conference room, Sir Robert pulled him aside for a private word. The security chief looked tired, older, somehow, than he had seemed during the briefing. He told Harrison that his discretion was essential, not just expected, but absolutely required. This incident could never be discussed, not with colleagues, not with family, not even years from now when Harrison had left royal service. The young guard understood the weight of what he was being told. This was not just about protecting the Queen Consort's reputation. It was about protecting the institution itself. Maintaining the image of stability and control that the royal family represented. Any suggestion that senior royals were unhappy or trying to escape would fuel endless speculation and damage public confidence. Back in her private quarters, Camilla was having her own difficult conversation. King Charles had been informed immediately, despite the early hour. He had arrived at Clarence's house before sunrise, his expression grave. The king was not angry exactly, but deeply concerned. His wife's actions put her at risk, put the institution at risk, suggested problems in their relationship that neither of them had fully acknowledged. Camilla tried to explain, searching for words that could convey her feelings without sounding ungrateful or weak. She loved Charles, she believed in the monarchy, and she understood her duties. But sometimes the weight became unbearable. The constant scrutiny, the endless criticism, the comparison to Diana that would never end, no matter how many years passed. She felt like she was living in a glass cage, always watched, always judged, never quite good enough. The king listened, his face showing the strain of his own position. He was caught between his love for his wife and his duty to the crown. He could not change the fundamental nature of royal life, could not shield her from public opinion or reduce the expectations that came with her role. But he could try to understand, to provide support, to make small adjustments that might ease her burden. They talked for hours, speaking more openly than they had in months. Camilla admitted she had been struggling with anxiety, waking in the middle of the night with her heart racing and her mind spinning with worries. The passage had become a symbol of freedom in her mind, a way out if things became truly unbearable. She had never intended to actually leave permanently, but knowing the option existed provided psychological comfort. Charles recognized the seriousness of what she was describing. This was not simple stress or temporary fatigue. His wife was showing signs of a real mental health crisis, one that had been building quietly while everyone around her focused on schedules and appearances. He made immediate decisions. Camilla would reduce her public engagements temporarily. She would begin sessions with a therapist who specialized in high-pressure environments. Most importantly, they would find ways to give her more genuine privacy and personal time. Meanwhile, in the security office, the team was analyzing how the passage had remained unknown for so long. The architectural records were incomplete, typical for buildings with centuries of modifications and additions. The passage appeared on some Victorian-era drawings, but was marked as sealed in renovation documents from the 1960s. Someone had unsealed it at some point. Or perhaps it had never been properly closed in the first place. Harrison completed his shift and went home to his small apartment in South London. He made breakfast, tried to sleep, but his mind kept returning to that moment in the garden. The look on Camilla's face had stayed with him. He had seen genuine desperation there, a kind of trapped helplessness that no amount of privilege or position could mask. He thought about his own reasons for joining royal protection: the prestige, the salary, the pride of serving the crown. But he had never really considered what it meant from the other perspective. What was it like to be the person being protected, constantly surrounded by guards, unable to move freely or make simple choices without layers of approval and coordination? The next few days brought subtle changes at Clarence House. Additional staff were assigned to support the Queen Consort's personal needs. Her schedule was quietly adjusted, creating more gaps in private time. The sealed passage became just another forgotten piece of architectural history, its brief moment of significance erased from all but the most classified records. Harrison noticed something else as well. Other guards began treating the Queen Consort slightly differently. Nothing obvious or unprofessional, but there was a new gentleness in how they managed her security. They gave her more space when possible, were more accommodating of spontaneous decisions, and generally tried to make her protection feel less like confinement. Sir Robert never explicitly ordered these changes, but his team understood what was needed. They had all read Harrison's report, had all attended the security briefing, and had all drawn their own conclusions. The Queen Consort was not an asset to be controlled or a problem to be managed. She was a person under enormous pressure who needed both protection and compassion. 3 weeks after the incident, Camilla attended a charity event at a children's hospital. Harrison was part of her security detail that day. As they prepared to depart, the Queen Consort paused and looked directly at him. She did not say anything, but her slight nod conveyed understanding and perhaps gratitude. Harrison nodded back, a moment of human connection that transcended their official roles. The story could have ended there, with order restored and the crisis contained. But the incident had revealed fractures that could not be icily repaired. Camilla continued her therapy, worked on her coping strategies, and tried to find balance in an inherently unbalanced life. Charles remained supportive but worried, aware that his wife's well-being was fragile and required ongoing attention. For Harrison, the night had been an education in the reality behind royal glamour. He continued his work with renewed dedication, but also with deeper empathy. Every time he stood post in those quiet early morning hours, he remembered that the people he protected were more than their titles, more than their public images. They were human beings dealing with extraordinary pressures in ways that were not always perfect or dignified. 2 months had passed since that March night, and summer had arrived in London with unusual warmth. Harrison had settled into a routine that felt almost normal again. The incident remained classified, locked away in secure files that only a handful of people could access. Life at Clarence House had returned to its usual rhythm of ceremonies, engagements, and carefully managed public appearances. But beneath the surface, things had changed in ways both visible and invisible. Camilla appeared more relaxed during her public duties, her smile reaching her eyes more often than before. The therapy sessions were helping, giving her tools to manage the anxiety that had been building for years. She had also started taking morning walks in the private gardens, a small freedom that provided genuine relief without triggering security concerns. Harrison noticed these changes during his shifts. The Queen Consort would sometimes acknowledge the guards with small gestures, a brief smile or a quiet thank you that felt sincere rather than automatic. The atmosphere around her had softened somehow, as if the crisis had forced everyone to recalibrate their approach to her well-being. Then one evening in late May, something unexpected happened. Harrison was assigned to night duty again, the same shift pattern that had put him on post during the original incident. Around 11 in the evening, Lady Patricia summoned him to a small sitting room on the ground floor. This was unusual. Guards were not typically called to private meetings unless there was a specific security concern. When Harrison entered the room, he found Camilla sitting alone by the window. She dismissed Lady Patricia with a gentle wave, indicating she wanted privacy for this conversation. Harrison stood at attention, uncertain about the protocol for this situation. The queen consort gestured for him to sit, but he remained standing, more comfortable with the formal distance. Camilla spoke quietly, her words measured and thoughtful. She wanted to thank Harrison personally for his professionalism during the March incident. She knew her actions had put him in a difficult position. It forced him to make quick decisions about how to handle a situation no training manual had prepared him for. His discretion and respectful approach had not gone unnoticed. Harrison responded with careful courtesy, assuring her that he had simply done his duty. But Camilla shook her head slightly. She explained that many guards would have handled the situation differently, would have been more aggressive or judgmental. Harrison had seen her at her most vulnerable and had responded with humanity rather than just protocol. That mattered to her more than he might understand. The conversation shifted to something deeper. Camilla asked Harrison about his experience in royal protection, whether he ever felt the weight of the constant vigilance, the responsibility of keeping people safe while also respecting their dignity. Her questions were genuine, coming from someone trying to understand the perspective of those who surrounded her daily. Harrison found himself speaking more openly than he had intended. He talked about the balance between security and service, the challenge of being present but not intrusive, the strange intimacy of protecting someone while maintaining professional distance. He admitted that the March incident had changed how he thought about his role, had made him more aware of the human cost of royal life. Camilla listened carefully, and when Harrison finished, she shared her own perspective. She described the isolation that came with her position, how every conversation was filtered through layers of formality and expectation. She talked about the constant awareness of being watched, judged, and compared. The hidden passage had represented something she desperately needed. A small piece of control in a life where almost everything was managed by others. She spoke about Diana, too, a subject usually avoided in official settings. The comparisons would never end, Camilla knew that. No matter what she did, part of the public would always see her as the other woman, the one who did not deserve to be where Diana should have been. The weight of that judgment had become crushing over time, making her question her place and her worth. Harrison listened without interrupting, understanding that the queen consort needed to voice these thoughts to someone outside her inner circle, someone who had witnessed her vulnerability but held no power over her life. His silence was not uncomfortable but supportive, giving her space to speak truths that were rarely acknowledged. After a long pause, Camilla changed the subject. She asked about Harrison's family, his life outside the palace walls. He told her about his mother, who worried constantly about his safety, his younger sister, studying medicine, his small apartment that felt too quiet after the structured environment of royal service. These details created an unexpected connection, a recognition of their shared humanity despite their vastly different circumstances. The conversation lasted almost an hour, far longer than anyone would consider appropriate for such an informal meeting. When it finally ended, Camilla thanked Harrison again and asked him to keep this discussion as private as the original incident. He assured her he would, understanding that this conversation was perhaps even more sensitive than the March crisis. Over the following weeks, Harrison noticed subtle changes in how Camilla interacted with the security team. She seemed more aware of them as individuals rather than just uniformed presences. She would occasionally ask about their families or thank them for specific accommodations. These small gestures created a warmer atmosphere, though always within the bounds of appropriate royal staff relationships. But the real test came in early June when the royal family faced a new crisis. Photographs appeared in a tabloid newspaper showing Camilla entering a private medical clinic in central London. The images were grainy and taken from a distance, but they sparked immediate speculation about her health. The palace press office went into crisis mode, trying to control the narrative before it spiraled into dangerous rumors. The truth was relatively simple. Camilla had been seeing a therapist at the clinic, part of the mental health support agreed upon after the March incident. But that truth could not be shared publicly without revealing the underlying crisis and the security breach that had prompted the therapy. The palace needed a cover story, something that explained the clinic visits without mentioning mental health or the hidden passage. Harrison watched the crisis unfold from his position within the security team. He saw the stress return to Camilla's face, the tension in her shoulders, as she dealt with another wave of invasive public scrutiny. The small progress she had made over the past months seemed to evaporate under the pressure of tabloid speculation and social media commentary. The palace eventually released a statement explaining that the queen consort had been receiving treatment for a minor recurring condition, nothing serious but requiring regular specialist appointments. The vague explanation satisfied some media outlets, but fueled speculation in others. Conspiracy theories emerged online, ranging from the ridiculous to the genuinely concerning. Through it all, Camilla maintained her public schedule, appearing at engagements with practiced composure. But Harrison could see the cost. The woman who had seemed more relaxed in recent weeks was once again wearing the mask of royal dignity, hiding her true feelings behind carefully managed smiles and scripted responses. One evening, Harrison found a handwritten note in his staff mailbox. It was brief and unsigned, but he recognized the handwriting from official documents he had seen. The note simply said, "Thank you for seeing me as a person, not just a problem. That matters more than you know." He understood the message and its significance. Camilla was acknowledging that their conversation had provided her with something rare and valuable: genuine human connection without agenda or judgment. In a world where every interaction was carefully managed and recorded, that simple exchange had been a moment of authentic communication. Harrison kept the note in his locker, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. It represented the complicated reality of royal service, the intersection of duty and compassion, protection and understanding. His job was to keep Camilla safe from physical threats. But that night in March and the conversation that followed had taught him that safety meant more than just preventing attacks. The summer progressed with its usual rhythm of garden parties, official visits, and ceremonial duties. The media gradually lost interest in the clinic's story, moving on to other royal dramas and scandals. The sealed passage remained hidden behind its wooden panel, now reinforced with steel and permanently locked. The March incident became part of classified history, known only to those who needed to know. But for Harrison and Camilla, the impact lingered in subtle ways. He approached his duties with deeper awareness of the human dimensions of royal protection. She continued her therapy and her morning walks, finding small ways to maintain her mental health within the constraints of her position. They rarely spoke directly, but when their paths crossed, there was mutual recognition of what they had shared. The incident had revealed fundamental tensions in royal life that had no easy solutions: the need for security versus the need for freedom, the demands of public service versus the requirements of personal well-being, the weight of history and tradition versus the reality of human limitations. These contradictions would continue long after everyone involved had moved on to other roles and other challenges. Autumn arrived with its familiar chill, painting the palace gardens in shades of gold and crimson. Harrison had been promoted to senior guard, recognition of his professionalism and discretion during the March incident. Though the official commendation made no mention of the specific event, with the promotion came new responsibilities and deeper access to the inner workings of royal protection. September brought preparations for the king's first state visit as monarch. The entire household was focused on logistics, security arrangements, and diplomatic protocols. Camilla would play a prominent role in the visit, hosting events and representing the royal family alongside Charles. The pressure was immense. Harrison noticed familiar signs of stress returning to the queen consort's demeanor. During a security briefing for the state visit, Sir Robert pulled Harrison aside once again. The security chief had aged noticeably over the past months, the weight of his responsibilities showing in new lines around his eyes. He asked Harrison to be particularly vigilant during the upcoming visit, not just for external threats, but for signs that Camilla might be struggling with the pressure. Harrison understood the unspoken concern. The March incident had been a warning sign, an indication that the queen consort had breaking points that needed to be respected and monitored. The state visit would push those limits with its endless demands and unforgiving schedule. If something similar happened during such a high-profile event, the consequences would be far more serious than a sealed passage and a few classified reports. The first week of October brought the visiting dignitaries and their entourages. Clarence House became a hub of diplomatic activity, formal dinners, private meetings, and carefully choreographed photo opportunities. Camilla moved through it all with practiced grace, her public performance flawless. But Harrison noticed small things that others missed. She held her shoulders too tight during long-standing events. Her smile sometimes flickered just before cameras flashed. She would touch her wedding ring repeatedly during stressful moments, a nervous gesture she probably was not aware of making. These were subtle signs, visible only to someone who had learned to look beyond the surface performance. On the third night of the state visit, Harrison was assigned to interior patrol during a formal banquet. The grand dining room glowed with candlelight and elaborate flower arrangements. Foreign dignitaries, mixed with British nobility. Everyone dressed in formal regalia and playing their assigned roles in the diplomatic theater. Camilla sat near the head of the table, engaged in animated conversation with a visiting ambassador, around midnight. As the banquet was winding down, Harrison noticed Camilla excuse herself from the table. This was not unusual. Long formal events required periodic breaks, but something in her movement caught his attention. She walked quickly, more urgently than the situation warranted. Her lady-in-waiting moved to follow. But Camilla waved her off with a subtle gesture that brooked no argument. Harrison made a quick decision. He spoke quietly into his radio, alerting the team that he was following the Queen Consort's movement as a precaution. He maintained a discreet distance, watching as Camilla navigated the crowded rooms toward the private quarters. But she did not head to her usual rooms. Instead, she turned toward the older section of the building, the area where the sealed passage had once provided her escape route. His heart rate quickened. Was she looking for another way out? Had the pressure finally become too much again? Harrison increased his pace slightly, closing the distance while trying to remain unobtrusive. He rounded the corner just in time to see Camilla. Standing in front of the wooden panel that hid the sealed passage, she was not trying to open it. She was simply standing there, one hand resting against the wood, her head slightly bowed. From his position, Harrison could see her shoulders shaking slightly. The Queen Consort, who had just spent 3 hours being charming and diplomatic to foreign dignitaries, was quietly falling apart in a deserted corridor. Harrison faced an immediate dilemma. Protocol dictated he should alert her lady-in-waiting or private secretary. Someone from her personal staff should be handling this emotional crisis. But he also remembered their conversation in May, her need to be seen as a person rather than just a position. Sometimes protocol was not the answer. He approached slowly, making his footsteps audible so he would not startle her. Camilla looked up, her eyes red, but no tears visible on her face. She had been crying silently, maintaining control even in this private moment of breakdown. When she recognized Harrison, something shifted in her expression. Not embarrassment exactly, but acknowledgement of an unwanted witness to her vulnerability. Harrison spoke quietly, asking if she needed him to contact anyone, or if she would prefer privacy. His tone was gentle but professional, offering options without judgment. Camilla shook her head slowly. She did not need staff fussing over her or doctors prescribing additional medication. She just needed a moment to breathe, to stop performing, to remember that the sealed passage represented an impossible escape from an inescapable life. They stood in silence for a long moment. Harrison maintained his professional distance but did not retreat. His presence was both watchful and supportive, a subtle balance he had learned over months of navigating the complexities of protecting someone who sometimes needed protection from the role itself. Finally, Camilla spoke. Her voice was tired but steady. She talked about the weight of constant performance. How every meal was a diplomatic opportunity, every conversation a potential news story, every gesture analyzed for hidden meaning. The state visit had reminded her that this pressure would never truly end, would continue until age or death finally released her. From the obligations she had accepted, Harrison listened as he had before, understanding that sometimes his job was not action but presence. The Queen Consort was not asking for solutions or reassurances. She was simply acknowledging reality to someone who had witnessed both her strength and her fragility. Someone who would not minimize her feelings or try to manage her emotions for institutional purposes. After several minutes, Camilla composed herself with visible effort. She thanked Harrison for his discretion and asked him to ensure she returned to the banquet without attracting attention to her absence. They walked back together, maintaining appropriate distance, but moving in silent cooperation. Harrison's radio remained quiet. He had not reported this incident, making a judgment call that would either be vindicated or cost him his career. The banquet was indeed winding down when they returned. Camilla slipped back into her seat during a lull in conversation, her absence largely unnoticed in the general movement and noise. Harrison resumed his patrol position, watching as she picked up her diplomatic role again, smiling and conversing as if the previous 20 minutes had never happened. The state visit concluded successfully 3 days later. The diplomatic objectives were achieved, the media coverage was positive, and the royal family's reputation for excellent hosting remained intact. Behind the scenes, only a handful of people knew how close things had come to another crisis. Another moment when the pressure had nearly exceeded Camilla's capacity to bear it. In the weeks that followed, Harrison observed continued changes in how the household managed the queen consort's schedule and well-being. More breaks were built into long events. Her therapy sessions increased in frequency. Staff were briefed on recognizing signs of stress and responding with flexibility rather than rigid protocol. These adjustments were subtle but significant, representing lessons learned from the March incident and its ongoing aftermath. Harrison also noticed changes in himself. The promotion had given him more authority, but the experiences of the past year had given him something more valuable: wisdom about the human cost of royal service. He trained junior guards differently now, emphasizing the importance of seeing beyond the role to the person, balancing security concerns with compassionate awareness. December brought the traditional Christmas preparations and the end of Harrison's first full year in senior protection. Looking back, he realized that the March incident had been a turning point for everyone involved. It had exposed vulnerabilities that could not be ignored, had forced difficult conversations about mental health and institutional pressure, and had ultimately led to meaningful, if modest, changes in how the royal household operated. The sealed passage remained hidden behind its panel, now just another forgotten piece of architectural history. But its brief moment of significance had revealed important truths. Even the most privileged lives carried burdens that could become unbearable. Even the strongest people had breaking points that needed to be recognized and respected. And sometimes the most important aspect of protection was not preventing physical threats, but maintaining space for human dignity and struggle. On Christmas Eve, Harrison received another handwritten note. It was longer this time, expressing gratitude not just for his discretion but for his humanity. Camilla acknowledged that the past year had been extraordinarily difficult, but having people around her who saw beyond the crown and the title had made it bearable. She hoped he understood that his compassionate professionalism had quite literally helped save her during some of her darkest moments. Harrison filed the note with the first one. 2 pieces of paper that represented something profound about service and sacrifice, duty and compassion. They would remain private, never shared or publicized, but they would remind him why he had chosen this difficult profession. Protecting people meant more than preventing attacks or managing logistics. It meant honoring their humanity even when the institution threatened to erase it. As the year ended and a new one began, the rhythms of royal life continued unchanged on the surface. State events, charity functions, ceremonial duties, all proceeding according to ancient protocols and modern schedules. But beneath the surface, subtle changes persisted. Camilla seemed more grounded, more capable of navigating the pressures without losing herself completely. The security team operated with greater awareness of the psychological dimensions of their work, and Harrison stood his posts with a deeper understanding of what he was really protecting. Not just a building or a title or an institution, but a human being trying to find dignity and purpose within a role that often seemed designed to crush individuality. That knowledge made the long hours and constant vigilance meaningful in ways that went beyond duty or career advancement. The March incident would remain classified for decades, perhaps forever. The full story would never be public knowledge. But its impact rippled through the lives it touched, changing perspectives and priorities in ways both large and small. In the grand narrative of royal history, it was barely a footnote. But in the personal histories of those involved, it was a defining moment that revealed both the cost and the meaning of service to something larger than oneself.